So, as I was saying before, the feed cut out, I've known all these things separately, and as you can, you're probably going to want to smack me up the head. Why didn't you connect this together before? And it's almost irritating. I had just kind of like an astounding realization about huge chunks of things that I've been trying to get in contact new to Christ about. And then I've had just a mind-blowing experience once again. So if you read the book of Mark, right? I mean, let me just mention this first. There's like, you know, there's Gnostic Gospels and there's stuff like that, but there's also, we have the Ebionites, who are Judaizers, who Paul argues against, right? And we have things that wind up getting, you know, coming to canon. Then there's works that are, I don't know, antilegomena, or basically works that are accepted. There's nothing really wrong with them, but they're just not part of the canon. And then there's works that it's just the way people acting are not right, or it's not the way, you know, it is in the more popular one or the more accepted one. And then there's heretical works for reasons that might not be seen as heretical by even somebody who accepts Nicaea, you know, or Chalcedon, or even Ephesus, or this, you know, any of that stuff. And it's very odd. And then there's definite heretical ones where you don't know which group used these, and these things got preserved, you know, and they weren't pulled out of the sand. They've been, well, parts of them have been pulled out of the sand, but other ones were found in monasteries here and there. The Ebionites, after the destruction of the temple, right? The three biggest Jewish communities were Alexandria, Rome, and Antioch. No surprise why those were the three areas that the Christians rose up and became massive populations in. Paul's Christianity spread around Greece and Anatolia. Never went to Alexandria. He sent a letter to Rome and said he was going there, right? Now, Acts, if you just look at, especially the beginning of Acts, of who goes where, what's described, this and that, not necessarily their relations to each other or what the final solutions of these things are, but just how there's things that are amazing in there, like Paul meeting a group of followers of John the Baptist that don't know about Jesus. What? And then there's disputes with the Church of Jerusalem, right? Well, if Jerusalem gets wiped out in AD 70, it gets boom, and they see the the temple in ruins, and they see where are they going to go? There are already too Jewish for the Christians. Maybe not too Jewish for the Christians at this time, but definitely too Christian for Jews. So Alexandria and Rome may be places they might go, but where they wind up later on. The Persians didn't have Nestorius yet, so they didn't have a guy to say, oh, that guy is anathemized totally by the councils of the empire in Constantinople. Now we can be friends with the faction of Christians, once he fled into the Irentia, the Sassanid Empire, Parthian Empire, whatever you want to call it. Now, there was a place where when Christianity became imperial, they could go. And the Ebionites were said to be around by later people. They were gone south. And these Ebionites were people who said to follow the Jewish law and did not like did not like Paul at all. They couldn't stand Paul. And they were said to be baptizing themselves constantly, doing these washings constantly. But the followers of John the Baptist, the Mandaeans, who I thought were much later, I think are probably from the time of John the Baptist, are doing this as well. Now there were, at the time, mentioned in the Gospels, there's Sicarii, not the Sicarii aren't mentioned, they're mentioned in other places, but there's the Zealots who want violent opposition to Rome. Even after the destruction of the temple, you have Bar Kokhba, who tries to take it violently, and then there's violent Jewish attacks afterwards. Where are these Jewish Christians that may want to be violent, like Simon Peter, or, you know, like, not of the teaching of Simon Peter, but like Simon Peter? Or maybe they like him, and they're using the Gospel of Mark. Not specifically the Ebionites, but an anti-Pauline group that would think, hey, Mark is okay. Because when I read Mark, I got the idea of Son of God being a title of honor, not that God had a son or anything like that. You know, and these people could look at John. Okay, we get that. Again, there's works like Thomas that we see there. You know, they see this. There's a branch of Christians that had that, the infancy gospel of Thomas, which that's not. You may call it Gnostic, but it's not really Gnostic. It's just this other thing, right? There was the Byzantine Empire wasn't the only Christian area. Of course, you had Ethiopia, but you also had the Lakhmids and the Ghastanids. Guess where they were? Yeah, they were directly south of where the Byzantines and the Sassanids meet. They were right south of Palestine and Jordan. Now, what's directly south of Palestine and Jordan? They stretch along the Red Sea and the I believe it's the Persian Gulf. Look at that. They stretched along both, you know, the top and then both sides of the Arabian Peninsula. And they were warriors, and they were used as auxiliary troops. And they were Christians, but they were not. I mean, in writings, Warwick of Norfolk gets called a Nestorian monk. And I was reading John Damascus today because I was looking up on Blackstone, like the quote where it said you could see Aphrodite's head still in the stone. And I'm thinking, why? John Damascus calls him an Arian monk. What might Warwick of Norfolk would have been? An Ebionite. Found an Islamic source calling him an Ebionite. An earlier source than John, well, I don't know if it's earlier, but it's an early source calling him, because that's the thing. Any type of Judaism, they're an Arian. I mean, that's how you discredit somebody. They're Arian, you know. You know that was the. I mean, they would use that even against Gnostics, against any heretic, anyone you wanted to get condemned to death or to be totally shunned by everybody so that they couldn't even make a living in the slightest, call them an Arian. Easiest, because out of the Monophysites, the Nestorians, the Chalcedonians, the Iconoclasts, those who liked icons, Nicaea was agreed upon. Call them an Arian. Don't try to. You don't have to explain yourself after you say they're an Arian. No explanation needed. So you've got people who were Jews who weren't opposed to using violence, and Christians who kept a lot of their Judaism, rejected Paul, who weren't afraid to use violence. You have these Mandaeans influencing them, and you have all these other works that are really safe to read, you know. And not to mention the Gospels that would have had a fourfold Gospel called the Diatessaron, you know. Or maybe you're just getting ideas from, you know, that are common, like Jesus being the Word of God, and, the Spirit of the Father, and stuff like this. There's the Spirit of God, or the Word of God, or you know, a different virgin birth story than would be in Luke, or that would be then not in Matthew or Luke. You know, like why not have a third or fourth or fifth, where it's still Gabriel, still the same elements, but just different, and it's the Spirit of God comes into her, so it's virgin birth, but he's not the Son of God. It's not God's God. You know, to keep this idea away that, you know, there's some physical, you know, God does not have a physical body. You know, this is something that has been said always, and that's how it's understood. But it was that Jesus was divine then. No, miraculous birth. He was only called the Son of God as a title, as the highest among the prophets. You know. Or the seal of the prophets, or something like this, you know. He gets called the seal of the prophets in Hebrews. So you could read Christian works, you can accept Christian works, and have these views, but how would you discern that and have safeguards against it? I mean, Eastern Orthodox Church has the creeds, and each church, Calvinism has its points of Calvinism, of the lens to read it through. The Lutherans have their lens that they read it through. The Jehovah's Witnesses have their lens to read it through. You already need to know what you're trying to read before you read it. You can't really reconstruct from scratch, right? And I would say the Eastern Orthodox Church holds the tradition of the apostles, and that's where they're getting